We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 Hello from Autistic Radio, now sponsored by coldpack.co.uk. If you're a practitioner, a chiropractor, a physiotherapist, an osteopath who's looking for a cryotherapy solution, which also has your name and details printed on the pack, then coldpack.co.uk gives profits over to Autistic Radio and Autistic Association. If you need a cold pack for another reason, as a consumer, go to coldpack.co.uk and every penny that you spend on your cold pack will help what we do here at Autistic Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 19th of October 2025. And this is where we talk about the Facebook posts that have been shared on Autistic Radio's Facebook page. The first post is from Emergent Divergence, the Neurodivergent rambling of David Gray-Hammond. As an author, university professional your parents warned you about, as described, and is based in the UK. And he shared the following. As of this month, it has been 10 years since I was last an inpatient in a psychiatric facility. While the road has been winding and bumpy, I am happy to be celebrating a decade of freedom and autonomy. I wasn't really sure how to celebrate 10 years, but for a short time I decided to offer a discount on subscriptions to my newsletter. This supports my ongoing work and allows me to spend more time creating free resources and content free. And there's a subscription link and a thank you for all being part of the journey and what I have been building the past decade.
When you see that somebody is calmly and quietly describing an actual event here in a very calm, quiet, elegant way, it's very affecting. 10 years, a journey away from being an inpatient. That's a lovely thing to witness. I don't want to say congratulate someone on. I don't want to say, because the person's done this themselves and they haven't done it for us to admire them for. It's lovely for us to witness what this person has done for themselves.
I think it's lovely too. It just caused me to have to calculate my own 40 years for the same thing. I think people are brave when they do this. I'm going to have to look up David Gray-Hammond, and he seems like a valuable person to follow.
The milestone thing reminds me of my own milestone, and it's something I don't put on publicly, but it's something that I keep in my mind. When I was in a psychiatric facility, it was through my own choice, and it was back in 1998. And I can remember it was the 16th of August 1998 is when I was discharged, and I was kind of saying to myself, as important this part of my life was, I don't want to go back into another facility like this. And at the time, I thought if I did, it would be a backward step. And despite having, as people do, tough times in life, it never has come close to needing that sort of kind of facility, that sort of treatment. And any time it hits 16th of August every year, I remember that date very well. And it's slowly going towards 30 years. And it's not something I would announce, but it is something that inspires oneself. And they feel that there's not a need for people to say, well done, congratulations. It's just sometimes you need to say it yourself or even share it yourself. And saying that, it's nice to recognise milestones without feeling that you're being patronised and give someone a pat in the back that they didn't really ask for. So, yeah, it's inspiring, but it's also, there's a connection there as well, which I appreciate.
Fair to say that David is one of the foremost thinkers around autism and ADHD, who comes from a background of lived experience. He's one of the people that we rely on to either get information from or get stimulation for our own conversation from. You don't have, nobody is right about everything. It's all a flux. It's all an inquiry. David knows that. And he's the one that is Socratically inquiring on our behalf. And we benefit. He's a trailblazer. He's part of the autistic revolution.
The next post is from Helen, Autistic Realms. And what Helen has shared is the following. Inclusion can't come from erasure. Removing neurodiversity and diagnosis from education doesn't create belonging. It silences it. True inclusion means recognising difference and not pretending it isn't there. And she shared from Autistic Realms an article. And in the article itself, which is called Inclusion Needs Recognition, Not Erasure, a Neurodiversity Affirming Approach. And the recent TES article featuring psychiatrist Sami Tamimi, which is called Why Invented CAND Labels Are Disabling Pupils, October 2025, has provoked strong reactions across neurodivergent and educational communities. It raises important questions about the medicalisation of childhood and the failures of the current SEND system. It also perpetuates deeply harmful narratives that undermine neurodivergent people and risks fueling policy cuts under the guise of rethinking support. Removing neurodiversity from education, as suggested, would harm the very children inclusion is meant to protect. This response is written from a neurodiversity affirming perspective as a lay identified autistic ADHD person. We need to value lived experience and validate the lives of marginalised people that are already routinely misunderstood and dismissed, and being pushed further to the edges of society, battling for accommodations and support. Inclusion can't come from erasure. Removing neurodiversity and diagnosis from education doesn't create belonging. What are people's thoughts? It's a lengthy article, but very important to share.
I have a question rather than a thought. I'm just experiencing all of these concepts because I'm newer to this. Is there a risk right now for students and this concept of erasure?
I think the post is in response to a Times Educational Supplement article, which in its title points to the possibility that made-up labels given to special educational needs pupils here in the UK are a negative thing. I don't know how far the argument goes, but there is a link there to the article.
I'll have to read that. My thoughts while you were reading it to us was, depending on what age we are, we would have gone to school during a time when a certain set of thinking was in place. For example, testing of a certain sort. And then there would be the case of younger people who may have benefited from I think they're called IEP, individual education plans. And then I was thinking, they are improving. Maybe at first they weren't ideal, but they may be helpful. And if they were taken away, I would think that wouldn't be good. I think all of this sort of needs to improve, and it will change over time. But I'll read the article. This is a very interesting post.
The only problem with this is that diagnosis is being based solely on deficits and strengths being ignored. And the fact that the only increase in numbers is due to the fact that people weren't diagnosed before.
Yeah, this is the politics of creating scarcity. And if we look at what The article, the full article at Autistic Realms is very interesting. I've had to skim it quickly, but I'll read the last paragraph. A truly neuro-affirming inclusive system would integrate neurodiversity education for teachers grounded in lived experience and current research. It would recognize monotropism and sensory profiles as part of a natural human diversity and not a pathology. It would provide support based on needs rather than requiring diagnostic proof of those needs. It would preserve access to diagnosis for those who seek it for self-understanding or legal protection and validate self-identification alongside. It would shift from intervention to accommodation, changing systems and environments rather than changing the people. I think that last one is very pertinent to listeners all the way around the world. Intervention means that you're changing the person. Accommodation means that you change the environment and the situation the person is to respect that person's individuality.
That makes sense. And just to your point, Robbie, at least here in the recent past, I'm thinking, actually not that recent, about 30 years ago, when my son had a diagnosis, he also at the same time in the report, it provided this, not just what he was lacking, but what his big strengths were. And I think that helped him in school. Every teacher is different, and the system certainly wasn't in this ideal place at all. It said he had the central auditory processing disorder and was highly intelligent and had ADHD, but I think it's when they put these other measures in about his abilities, some teachers struggled with it, but they were informed that, oh, you may be surprised to know that this person is gifted, and you might not notice it because you don't know how to interpret the differences that he has.
We now have a definition of autism, a definition of neurodiversity, a definition of ADHD that increases the number of people that are eligible for those labels, diagnoses, whatever you want, identities, has exploded in our knowledge. We now recognize so many people that our society is almost destabilized. An already dysfunctional system is under an avalanche. Some local authorities are spending more money fighting in court with lawyers to keep certain individuals from getting access to what is their right under our law, to stop them having precedence, and it would cost to produce the required accommodation being asked for. The whole system is in disarray. Now, it will be necessary for people to comment like this, but it's necessary to also find radical solutions. And frankly, for most people with SEND children, it's about homeschooling and cooperatives and getting together and reinventing the school for your children, because you cannot trust these structures out there to do it. It has to be a DIY thing now. You have to find your own version. Last time you did it by building your own schools through charities to create ABA versions. This time you're going to have to do it with something that's more neuro-affirming and get away from the black and white of misused behaviorist concepts. Behaviorism is a version of a science that is very new, and it's been misapplied to autistic people. But if you have to go the other way then. You have to make it Steiner, make it something else, but you have to do it for yourselves now, because the rest of society is not on your side on this.
I agree with you. One of the important things when you read the last paragraph to us was that the system needs to change. And that would be far less expensive than having individual students on individual education plans. What needs to happen is just what that last paragraph said. The training of teachers and the way the school works would be far less expensive than having individual accommodations for individual people who are different. Now let's think back to before everybody was diagnosed. So I'm going to go all the way back 50 years to being in school. There were just as many differences in students. I can distinctly remember students who were constantly sent to the office and or all different ways of dealing with it in this other time. But they were already there. So the system needs to change, and it would be less expensive, I think.
I'm going to introduce the text. Raymond points to the post and says that they like the image. I think there is something in that. There's something poetic in that image, and I get it with you, Ray. Robbie says that school left him traumatized. He also then points out that for him, school is not about learning. It's about teaching children to be compliant. And Ray reminds us of that old phrase, remedial classes. Got away lightly. School was obviously a fucking trauma. But I think, in comparison to what I hear other people, my school was almost accidentally accommodating to my needs. It was away from the rest of society. It was a big boarding school where I had some certainty around things. There was just the right level of bullying to understand group behavior. There was a forced community, which meant that you could not other than have friends or para-friends, so you could not be isolated in the way that some people. There's so many things about the fortunate accident, and it's from a world in which teachers just knew some kids were like that. They were a bit delicate, or they would have an idea they're a bit sciencey, or they would have a version in their head of, we know roughly how to make these kids work a little bit better than the other kids. And that was a natural ability that some people had produced for themselves in a hippy-dippy time of the 70s. And that accidentally working could be a model going forward. Just a little bit of understanding would make the necessity for all of this work disappear for a certain group of us, particularly the intelligent group or the people with skills, at least in some ways. And we can make it so much cheaper and easier. But they refuse to do it. They want to do it the way they do it, which is part of the capitalist system.
The next post is from that spicy autistic Femme, who's a blogger, an autistic-led neurodivergent insight with bite, unmasking, unlearning, reclaiming, late diagnosed, burnout, self-understanding, offering spicy truths, tender support, and real talk for neurodivergent folks. And they shared a quote from The Idealist, and it says, "I wanted to talk about it. Damn it, I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell. I wanted to shout about it. But all I could do was whisper, I'm fine."
I really like this, and I've never felt this way. I can't really see, but I feel as though that person, and we've talked about this before, might be part of that generation. Like maybe a millennial or something. And we've said this before, we could learn a lot from them. Just her name, that spicy autistic Femme. I'm just so glad these people can say things like this. She may not be able to say it, or she felt she could only whisper it, but it's closer than maybe the past when I honestly didn't think I was fine.
Teresa, are you expressing a woman-to-woman thing here? Are you, as a senior generation now, woman, admiring back this younger woman in a generation and seeing the progress that she has made in comparison to what your experience was about speaking out, and then maybe even projecting to see how yours now is so much more than somebody in your past? Have I read that right?
No, I think it's men or women, children in general. And this is the people themselves, not the system around them, although the system around them has to change too. Somehow are more fine. I honestly didn't even have anything to whisper. If I whispered, I would have whispered, something's really wrong with me, not I'm fine.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to catch up with some of the text. They overlap a bit from the last, but the first part is about school. We went from school is about teaching children to be compliant in people's experience and remedial classes as a thing that they remember. And then Robbie says that you can't learn when you are being traumatized in the situation. I was dealing with being bullied by both children and teachers. I've seen that happen, and I can see that. He says he wanted to learn, but he did not get the opportunity, which ironically is spelt wrong, which I think is fitting. You didn't learn how to spell opportunity right there, Robbie, which makes me smile, which is funny. Now I realise I probably would have struggled to do exactly the same, which also makes me laugh. Harry says, great point, Robbie. Looking back, I feel exactly the same about school. Robbie returns with, I returned to college as a mature student, but by then it was too late. GR says, I bottled things up for years, and the final crash took 12 years, but when it happened, it was devastating. Robbie points out that neurotypical social rules means that you have to say, you are fine. And Ray points out that, look, some feelings can't be put into words, even if we had all the ability, that some things are too profound, I'm guessing. The last thing that's in the text is Robbie saying that I say how I really feel, then I get in trouble for it. And the language there is of a schoolboy in trouble. The way you're expressing that is very poetic, Robbie, because what you're pointing out, a link right the way back.
In my job, there was a major reorganisation. I was moved from a business section to a technical section. And about 4 weeks in, they decided to do a feedback session. And I think there were 12 of us in the room with the manager who'd organised it all. And they went round and how do you feel? And everyone's really happy and it's going well. And it gets to me and I said, I just spent the last 4 weeks staring out the window. I have absolutely nothing to do. So the section you just moved me out of are now buried under work. So the best thing I think would be if I went back. And afterwards I was told that the manager said to someone, the manager was apparently incandescent, and he said, I'll get him for that. And a year later, when I was being ferociously bullied, he was the person that had to look at the grievance I filed, 14 pages long. And he said, except for one minor paragraph, I made the whole thing up and I had to walk away. They paid me to walk away. And I still have nightmares a couple of times a month about the situation that I was in there.
That's horrible. And sadly, it sounds so real. It's, even if you're honest, and you're being honest, you're being polite, you're not trying to be a nuisance, you're not trying to defy anything. If you're just speaking through the heart and doing the right thing in your head, it's like you get punished for it because you're challenging an authority. And depending who the authority is and how their personality is, it can end quite badly for you. And it could even turn into what was just been described as bullying, intimidation. It really frustrates me how this happens. And from stories I'm hearing, it happens far too often.
That is a dreadful trauma that we just heard. And not all of us have experienced anything as harsh as that. But the example you used, GR, of in that new position saying, I'm looking out the window, I'm assuming you finished your work really quickly, and it's what the heck. That I've heard before. I don't know if it was here in the last few weeks or if it's something I read in the last few weeks. That is an autistic experience. So it must not just be a thing that's happened to you, but yours is profound and traumatic, and I'm so sorry to hear it.
Yeah, bullied at school, bullied in jobs, not all of them, but some of them. And one of the things I hate is when people say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because as I've said in the past, I was literally broken. And every time I was broken, I put myself back together. And it just got to the point where the pieces don't fit together very well. And there's not a lot left of who I was.
Thanks everyone for the discussion tonight. Also thanks to the people that shared these posts that created the discussion.
Spectrum Voices Conversation is an Autistic Association production for autisticradio.com. If you have something to share with us, if you need a voice, you can make different kinds of programs with us. You can make a 10-minute short, or you can join us for a podcast to talk about a subject that is dear to your heart or something you think needs a wider audience. We have an open door policy for divergent views. We do not necessarily agree with everything that we share on our Facebook pages or the words expressed in our podcast. There are a lot of different divergent views which we are trying to allow get aired so that people can see things from different people's vantage points. We hope that you will join that conversation. Contact us through any of our links, Facebook, by email, directly to us.